Crystal, there's this story that I've been thinking about for about a week now.
Okay.
And I wanted to talk to you about this. This is not one that, I could do something myself on this, but it wouldn't do it justice.
Okay. All right.
So there's a woman who was traumatized by an ISIS attack. She didn't get physically hurt, but she was traumatized by an ISIS attack. She was there when it happened in 2016. Her name is Shanti de Corte.
Okay.
And 23 years old. She's Belgian. And she requested to be euthanized, which for those of you who don't know what that means, it's basically physician-assisted suicide. There are some places around the world where that is legal.
Mm-hmm.
Most places, I think it is not legal, but in some places it is legal. Now, usually when it is legal, there are like rules that go along with it. Nobody could just... Not anybody could be like, I want to die. And they're like, come here at 3:30 and you're good. Like, that's not how it works usually, right? Mm-hmm. So I'll give you a little bit of what they say here. A physically healthy 23-year-old was helped to take her own life in a truly shocking euthanasia case in Belgium. Shanti de Corte, traumatized after a terror attack in 2016, died in May after medics agreed she was so depressed that she could be legally euthanized. Last night, British campaigners fighting the introduction of assisted dying laws warned that even if a narrowly defined act was brought in, it would inevitably broaden over time to include those with mental health problems. But Dignity in Dying, which is calling for a change in the law, said there was no evidence from around the world that this tended to happen. Ms. de Corte from Antwerp developed depression and post-traumatic stress disorder after being caught up at Brussels airport in the Islamic State attack of March 2016, which killed 32. So, when I look at this, and for a long time, I've been a little conflicted on this idea. So let me explain. When it comes to social issues, I'm very pro-freedom. I'm very libertarian on social issues. So that just means live and let live. Mm-hmm. As long as you're not hurting anybody else, you do whatever the fuck you want, right? That's part of my mind. The other part of my mind believes within reason. So, you could do whatever you want, but there should be reasonable regulations around it so people don't go too far. So I'll give you an example. When I say legalize, tax, and regulate drugs, I don't literally mean you should go to CVS and be able to get crocodile, which will rot your flesh off. I mean, let's have legal a safe iteration of various different types of drugs, but we're still going to regulate out of existence the hardest stuff that will destroy you. Like crystal meth, you'll rot the teeth out of your fucking face. Crocodile, your flesh will rot off. It's not safe. So I'm still pro-regulation, even though I'm pro-freedom. You see what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. In this instance...
Nanny state guy, that's what you're saying.
In this instance, what do you think? Do you think, look, if anybody wants to kill themselves, they should be able to do it for whatever reason, full stop? Or do you think, yeah, I'm pro-euthanasia, but there should be rules around it? What's your take?
So what I read here is that Belgium is one of the only places that has mental health provision where you're allowed to go forward with the assisted suicide if you have documented severe mental illness. And that's why she ended up being able to qualify for being killed. And ultimately, I totally understand your perspective of how this is difficult to wrap your head around. You've got this healthy 23-year-old, seemingly with her whole life potentially ahead of her. And she's just, would she come to regret that? What about the people around her? What about her loved ones? All of those things. But, ultimately, I do support it because I do think, especially, I'll tell you, the thing that would make it harder for me is if she had kids, because then you are bringing other people into the situation. You're directly harming them. But if it's really basically you're an adult, you've decided this is what you want, you've gone through a rational process, and this is the direction that you want to go in. Yeah, I do support it. Okay,
so like I said, I've always been conflicted on this question, but as I was actually prepping for this segment, I talked myself more into the position of allow euthanasia, but it should be pretty strictly regulated. So let me break that down a little more as to why. So if we say euthanasia basically for any reason, for example, there's 21 million Americans who are depressed. It's about 8.4% of the population. If just 1% of them says, yeah, we want to kill ourselves, that's 200,000 legal suicides every year. I don't like that. I'm not okay with that. I think that goes way too far. So, because there's an element of that, Crystal, that I think is very essentialist when discussing people. So it's yes, you are depressed. That defines you. That's who you are. And it's never going to change. It's a very defeatist attitude. It's not going to change, so just fuck it.
On the other hand, to say, like, we know better is very paternalistic.
Well, but hold on. I'll even grant you that, sure. But sometimes I think paternalism is okay in limited circumstances. So I'll get to what I think are the proper guidelines are in a little bit. And maybe somebody like this would fit the proper guidelines, but maybe I'd have a little bit more of, you have to try this drug or that drug or that drug, this medicine, and it might take you a year more or whatever. You know what I'm saying?
Well, I think it also is worth mentioning she had attempted suicide herself.
Twice.
Multiple times.
Twice, yes.
And was on, a whole rack of different antidepressants just to get through the day. So it's very clear, like, this person was really suffering. And it may not have been physical suffering, but it was clear she was in a lot of pain. And it was also clear that without this law, she was trying to take herself out either way.
I understand that, but so are 8.4% of Americans. If we woke up tomorrow and 8.4% of Americans off themselves, I don't think we'd say freedom.
I think that's a straw man, because
it's not. It's the same idea.
No, because not all, everybody who's depressed is like, I want to kill myself, and I'm going about it trying to do it.
1% of them. We wake up tomorrow, 200,000 people kill themselves.
But you already actually have a real big suicide problem in this country. And so, again, I think she's a sort of in extreme anguish in terms of mental health. I don't think it was like, run-of-the-mill depression that 8% of the population has. She clearly tried to commit suicide multiple times and was in extraordinary anguish. So,
okay. Would you not concede, though, that if we go with this approach where it's zero regulation, anybody could kill themselves?
But there's not zero regulation.
Okay, but let me argue this point. Treat it as a pivot. I'm not responding to you directly.
Okay.
But if we had a society where anybody could go for any reason, that I actually am concerned that we send a message in society that we don't value life. It's not precious, and that it's expendable. And so who cares? And I think that's a terrible message to send. So the hardcore libertarian position on this, no, I think you need, in the same way that I would argue for gun policy, that, yeah, am I in favor of law-abiding citizens having a gun? Sure. But am I in favor of people having nukes and tanks and chemical weapons and an arsenal of 21,000 guns? No.
Yeah, but
so there's some limit on that freedom.
But what's the reason for that limit? In your thinking,
regulation of something that is a right but not an absolute right. In the same that we have defamation law, even though we have free speech.
So in my view, the limits in terms of gun ownership, it's because of the potential problems for the people surrounding them. So
no, and for them too, suicide, stuff like that, right?
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, that's true, because we do have a lot of data that says, domestic violence increases when you have guns. Like there's a whole ancillary set of issues that leads you to the idea that there should be some control over, what firearms and how you can obtain them and all of those things that isn't directly about that individual necessarily, but around the surrounding people. And so that's why in this instance, it really is pretty much about this one person and whether the choices they want to make,
but there's a precedent
live or die.
But there's a precedent too. And like you said, they're the only country that has, the mental. And look, here, let me soften my position a little bit to tell everybody what my actual take on this is. So I am in favor of euthanasia, physician-assisted suicide. I think that should be legal, but I think it should be limited to terminal illness, very old age, severe depression after exhausting all potential treatments. So that would put a waiting period in there. That's pretty hefty waiting period.
So
right?
She could meet that standard.
Potentially.
Yeah.
I just want to have this conversation with you. This case, I actually am torn on because if I knew all the details, maybe I would say, okay, it's fair.
Right.
But I do want to sort of pump the brakes just a touch, because the totally libertarian, totally pro-freedom position on this one, I do think gets a little goofy in the same way that, and Corn and I talked about this the other day, I'm in favor of freedom, but if we had legal duels in this country, like, two guys get into a fight inside a bar, and then they're like, I challenge you to a duel, and they go out there and they both shoot at each other and they both end up dead, or one of them ends up dead. Am I going to sit there and say, yeah, man, they both agreed, bro, totally fine, bro? Well, I think that's sort of dumb.
The regulation that I'm most totally persuaded on is like, it shouldn't be a willy-nilly thing. Like, there should be a long process of consideration, and I would put some guardrails on it.
So we're not too far apart then.
Yeah, but in my opinion, like,
she meets those standards is what you're saying.
Based on what I see, this is someone who's tried to kill herself twice already.
Okay, I would need to learn more before I agreed that she reaches the standard. She might reach the standard, but I might have said, look, you tried X, Y, and Z, psychological medication. Give this one a shot.
Yeah. I also would say, I'm not an expert on Belgium, I'll confess, but I would wager a guess that they probably have better healthcare outcomes than we do. And if you look at the evidence, probably values life more than our system ultimately does. So I'm also not persuaded by the idea that it would set up this societal notion of like life isn't precious.
Only in the scenario I was arguing against, which is the total for any reason whatsoever you can do it.
Total free for all.
Which I used to have that position.
On demand.
And then I was, it's because I do think that sends a message. Life's really not that precious. We don't care. We're not going to try to help you before you do the ultimate thing here. So that's what I fear. But to get back to, so what I would have is terminal illness, very old age, severe depression after exhausting all treatments, or debilitating disability after exhausting all treatments. Mm-hmm. So if you meet one of those criteria, I believe in freedom. I think you have a right to do that. Yeah. But I do think that those guardrails are just as important as saying, we believe in freedom of speech, but defamation is illegal. We believe in freedom of speech, but direct threats of violence are illegal. You know what I'm saying?
Would you add in a provision if there are dependents who require care from this person?
Well, that would probably fall under, you're saying
if they have kids,
kids or something like that.
Or any other, dependent person who they're like responsible for. To me, that changes the game.
I mean, it might change the calculation in terms of, materially change the calculation, but substantively in terms of would I use that to say you can't make that decision? I don't know. I don't know about that.
I think I would. So maybe I'm actually more restrictive than you are.
Yeah, maybe you are. Yeah,
because again, then you're talking about not just like this person making a decision that mostly just impacts them. You're talking about people who are in their care, who are depending on them, who are going to be fucked up if mom kills herself.
Yeah, well,
I feel different about that.
Fair enough. But we should just take this moment to reflect on this fact. What we're talking about here, we're having like a nuanced discussion about a complicated and important policy idea. And the position all across the U.S. is, except for maybe 2 or 3 states, I think maybe, it's under no circumstances can you do it, ever. And that, I think, is crazy. So, I've been arguing in this, for the context of this conversation, I've been arguing against the totally libertarian perspective, totally freedom perspective, where there's no regulations at all. But really, the conversation we should be having is the opposite one, which is like, you fucking monsters under no instances to let people do it. And honestly, I do think there's a little bit of a wink and a nod in our healthcare system these days, because, and I think this happened with my grandma on my mom's side, who was going to pass away, and it's very clearly the end of her life, and there were all these issues, and she was being treated at home. And I think the doctor gave my mom and my aunt a little, vial of morphine or whatever. And there was a little bit of a wink and a nod, like, here is the morphine. Don't give more than this amount, because then it would end her life. You know what I'm saying? And so I think there is like sort of under the table, but we should just make it over the table. Yeah. Because I certainly would want to have that option when I hit at that time in my life.
When you're at that point, you're suffering and you're, barely alive anyway.
Totally. So I'm in favor of regulating it. I'm in favor of being intelligent about it and exhausting all other options. But once you hit that end of the road, I mean, come on. I do think, though, I'd be very curious to see what the audience thinks. I do think they'll probably mostly agree with her and say, yeah, it's totally fine. And I get it. I would just need to know some more facts about it before I really were to pull the trigger on her. Maybe I'd want to pull the trigger on her almost literally. Maybe I'd want to have her try 1 or 2 more medications or something. You know what I'm saying? Because I do think help is the most important thing. You should try that first and foremost. Yeah. And then after everything's exhausted, then...
Lady was taking like 18 different drugs, though. It wasn't working for her.
No, I mean, I hear you. Yeah. I hear you. Maybe she would pass the test. I don't know. But ultimately, I feel like it is a sad story no matter how you slice it or dice it. You know what I'm saying?
There's no doubt about that. No doubt about that.
I'm definitely pro-euthanasia, but it's got to be within certain
and I just
guidelines.
Last thought, if we really want to have like a culture of life in this country, we would do a lot more to support people.
Medicare for all.
That would be one place you might want to start.
Free universal mental health care treatment, which, you should be able to go into a mental health clinic anywhere around the country for free, just like you should be able to go into a doctor's office anywhere for free. It is crazy. You're right. If we're going to value life, first and foremost, we need to do those things for sure.
Yeah.
If you want to see me and Crystal Ball interview legends like Noam Chomsky, Cornel West, and more, subscribe to Crystal, Kyle, and Friends on Substack. $5 a month gets you the video version a day early. Remember, we take 0 ad dollars for this podcast. Or you can sign up on Substack for free and get the audio version a day later. Link in the video description box below.